You're listening to Ridecast, the podcast of the Widow Sons Riding Chapter. Any opinions expressed in this episode do not represent those of the Widow Sons Masonic Biker Association, UK and Ireland. You can reach us on Facebook at Widow Sons-Riding Chapter, on Instagram at Widow Sons_Riding Chapter, on our website at ridingschapter.co.uk, and by emailing the show directly at ridecast@hotmail.com. Right, that's the housekeeping done. Kickstands up, on with the show. Hello, welcome to Ridecast. This is Yaka, and casting the pod with me today, my regular co-host, Gremlin.
Good afternoon, live yet again from the Kremlin.
And we also have Pigpen.
Good afternoon, everyone.
And here we are, episode 2. Very exciting to be back again, recording with my brothers on episode 2 of Ridecast. First episode, very successful. I'd like to say straight off the bat, thanks to everyone who followed the links that we posted on Facebook and everywhere else and listened to the show. We got actually a lot more listeners than we were expecting. I think you guys will agree.
I think most of them found us by accident.
Possibly. I'm not going to say how many people listened, but let's just say we're into triple figures. So that's not bad for a first episode.
Is that 2 zeros before the actual next number?
That's it, yeah. There were 6 people listened. No, there's more than that. I've been on the analytics on the podcasting host website, and it shows which countries our listeners are in. And you might be surprised to hear that, obviously, apart from the UK, we also had listeners in United States, South Africa, Mexico, France, and Canada. So we're international.
I thought there might have been some from Russia when they thought I was live from the Kremlin.
Well, I mean, if you're live from the Kremlin, then you're kind of, strictly speaking, our Russian listener as well as our co-host. Dar comrade. Canada, quickly on the subject of Canada, I think I know who one of our listeners in Canada may be. One of our ex-Riding Chapter members, and a chap by the name, or brother, I should say, by the name of David Graham, Dub Graham, we called him Dub. He is a Canadian Freemason who came over to work in the UK a few years back, and he was stationed in York. I think he was working for Network Rail at the time. He's like a railway engineer guy. And being a Canadian Freemason, he joined a local lodge in York and then joined our chapter of the Widow Sons. And he actually joined only a couple of months after I joined. So we were both new members of the chapter together. And he was what I call a proper biker. You know, he's one of those guys, you sent him a text or gave him a bell asking if he fancied a ride, and he was on your drive 15 minutes later, raring to go. And he bought, while he was in the UK, I don't think he'll mind me saying, he bought an old dog of a Kawasaki VN16. It's a 16, isn't it? He bought a VN 1600, which was a little old and tatty, but you know what? He rode all around Europe on that thing. While he was in the UK, took advantage and went all around Europe, and it never let him down. Yeah. So shout out to
on the Honda then.
Oh, it started early. Started early on episode 2. So yeah, shout out to Dub. Hello, mate. Miss riding with you. Say hello to the family from us. Also,
and just for reference, if it isn't Dub, you've just peed off whoever it was listening.
It might have been more than one. Who knows? Also, guys, 22% of our listenership were ladies. So hello to all the lady bikers that tuned in and listen to the podcast.
Well done.
Yeah, we have appeal across all facets. I think that's good to know, isn't it? Right then, guys. So, what do you say we get straight into the episode?
Sounds good to me.
Good.
Yeah.
Right. So, for my first segment that I have planned on this episode, just to give you a bit of background, I've been doing a lot of surfing across YouTube, looking at bike stuff, just to give me some ideas. And being the nostalgic type that I am, I was watching lots of videos and reviews on 90s motorcycles. So I thought that would make an interesting little segment. What if we talked about the best and most popular, the biggest selling bikes of the 90s? We'll go back into the 90s. So what I've done is I've made a list of the biggest selling, most popular bikes, the ones that I think made the biggest impact, and we'll run through them and talk about any memories we may have, anything that we can remember about them, and run through and maybe pick our favourites. And I think, you know, there'll be listeners out there that have maybe owned these bikes, ridden these bikes, or dreamt about owning one. And I know
can I just interrupt? Are we talking purely about sports bikes? Will there
Well,
be any cruisers on there?
the-
Any adventure bikes?
well, in the 90s, Pigpen will tell you that in the 90s, it was very much a sports bike nation. We were all buying sports bikes and riding sports bikes. So primarily they are sports bikes. There are some sports tourers on this list.
What about the
And-
Goldwing?
Well, yeah, I mean, they were a staple bike, but they weren't the bikes really that were selling the most in the 90s, I would say. But we can certainly do another section, in another episode about any type of bike you want. We can pick a type of bike and talk about tourers, talk about adventure bikes, we'll do cruisers. We've got to do cruisers because we're all cruiser riders. So we'll have to do a cruisers episode, won't we?
We could talk about Harleys for, 30 seconds?
Well-
Maybe fill a minute gap?
Can
Well,
I just say
Gremlin
I have just typed in to Google best-selling bikes of the 90s, and what comes up? The Harley Davidson FL STF Fat Boy 1990. Let's start with the Harley that became a cultural phenomenon. Beat that, you Honda riders.
Right. Okay. We'll let you go. Go with your Harley. Off you go. We're listening.
Well, it was the Fat Boy that was used in Terminator 2 Judgment Day, and I think it's actually one of the motorbikes that Pigpen would actually like to own.
What year did it come out? What year was that?
I'm not sure when Terminator 2 was. It was certainly late 80s.
No, I mean the bike.
90s.
The bike.
Yeah.
The bike.
But the bike itself,
Would have started earlier than the 90s probably, and
I mean, it was a revolution. So if we take a look at this, Willie G. Davidson and Vaughan Beals from AMF in 1981 bought the company back. By 1984, they created a new engine called the 1340cc Evolution, better known as Evo, and the first softail frame bike, the FSXT softail. But Harley needed something to drop a bomb and create an explosion, so to speak. And after a couple of years, they introduced the Fat Boy. And we all know that is probably the best loved bike in the world.
It's very
1990.
1990, the Fat Boy came out, did it?
Yeah,
Yep.
since its debut in 1990, Fat Boy.
They are fantastic looking Harleys, aren't they? I mean, I'd have one tomorrow.
Yeah.
So they were what? Did you say 1340?
That's what it started as, or
That's quite
the
small.
engine. But
That's quite
it
small,
is. But
isn't it?
the new Fat Boy that's just come out is, I think it's probably a 1745, which is the same as my Deluxe, and it's a 114, which is the new model, and they're still making them, and they are incredible motorbikes.
Very nice. Lots of
And
chrome.
the sales were increased after it was, showcased by Arnie Schwarzenegger in Terminator 2.
I'm sure that if you include American sales, then absolutely, positively, the Harleys are going to probably outsell everything.
Yeah,
but
so I think perhaps we need to classify from the beginning. What you're saying is just
UK
sport bikes, Japanese bikes in the UK.
Well, there was a non-Japanese manufacturer on my list, but Pigpen barred me from bringing it up.
Well, it wasn't a Ducati, was it?
Actually, there is a Ducati on my list, but we'll come. Let's not spoil the surprise.
Let's not spoil it.
Let's not spoil the surprise now.
So we started with number one bestseller of the 90s. So let's move to number two.
Hello there everyone, Yaka here with a quick interruption. If you'd like to see all the bikes that we talk about in this segment, head to our Facebook page, Widow Sons-Riding's Chapter. There's a post on there with a photograph containing all the bikes that we talk about in this list. Interruption over, back to the show. Well, these aren't in any particular order, I would like to point out. No, these are, I mean, obviously being from the UK and having lived through the 90s, and that was my decade that I first got into big bikes and started riding the big bikes. So these are the ones that I remember most and that were the biggest sellers in the UK. So let me get started. Unless there's any more interruptions, Kremlin, anything you want to get off your chest before we crack on with the segment?
I think we're all good right now.
Right, you've got your Harley plug in, so let's move on. Right, so get ready to get your nostalgia hat on, Pigpen. My first bike of the 90s that actually came out in 1990 to 2001 was the amazing Kawasaki ZZR 1100, which was the successor to the ZX10, which wasn't a very popular bike. They were trying to go for Kawasaki were trying to take the fastest bike sort of record, the fastest production bike record. Can you remember what held that position prior to the ZZR?
Was it a Harley?
Nope.
No, I don't think so. Don't think Harley will ever quite get there.
Well, I've got a couple that I remember being sort of spoken about as the high speed motherships. You know, the big engine high speed bikes. There was the CBR 1000, which was definitely a sports tourer, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Prior to the Kawasaki's own model, the GPZ 900, which was the Ninja, which was the Tom. In case you didn't know, the Tom Cruise Top Gun bike. He rode the,
Got you.
the GPZ 900, and that was prior to the ZZR. It was like a grandfather to the ZZR, but that was clocked at doing 154 miles per hour. The GPZ, flat out 154 mile an hour, whereas the ZZR was recorded at, I believe, 176, round about that sort of speed. Which, you know, when you consider it's only a few years later after the GPZ, that's a big jump, isn't it, from 154 to 176? So bikes really were getting fast. The ZZR, just for the nerds out there, the anoraks that are listening, 145 brake horsepower, 78 pound-foot of torque. And do you remember this, Pigpen? It was the first production bike to have ram air.
Yes.
To have what? To have what?
Ram air. What they had was
Unlike Pigpen, who's got no hair. Keep going.
they had an opening underneath the headlight in the fairing that was like an air scoop, and as the faster the bike went, the more the air was forced into this scoop, which pressurized the airbox and generated more power, basically. So it was called ram air because it was ramming air into the airbox, basically. And it had been used, I believe, on MotoGP and probably the World Superbikes and that sort of thing. But this was the first production bike to use a ram air system. So it was
the GSXR's a similar sort of thing. They had air ducts on the side of the bike what funneled air into the
airbox. So it was a similar thing, but I think Kawasaki, like, they what's the word? They copyrighted it, didn't they, as ram air, the Kawasaki ram air. But anyway, so oh, by the way,
it was the first time that ram air had been introduced on any production bike, and it took the bike to 283 kilometers per hour. Not only that, it blasted through the quarter mile in 10.43 seconds. And then it says that the ZX11 would hold on to the record for 6 years.
Yes, and that would have been the American name for it, the ZX11. In Britain, it was the ZZR11. Yeah, and it was replaced by the ZZR12 in 2002. So they just upped the engine size slightly. Thanks for
From
that.
1100 to 1200.
Yeah, they just went up to a 12. Yeah.
And was it still known as the Ninja?
The ZZR wasn't known as the Ninja, was it? I don't think. I don't ever remember it having any Ninja decals on it anywhere, but it was a beautiful coloured bike as well. I remember when they first came out. I tell you what I do remember. I would have been about 16 or 17 years old at the time, and it appeared on the front of Performance Bikes magazine. They had the one of the journos there, a guy called Mark Forsyth, testing it, and it was on I think it was on one of the airfields somewhere. It might have even been Elvington, although I couldn't.
Was that Bruce's brother?
Bruce Forsyth? No, it wasn't Bruce Forsyth's brother.
Higher.
It might have been Frederick Forsyth's brother. I don't know. But they were an amazing bike. And I remember going in and seeing them in the showroom at 16, 17 years old and thinking, one day I will own a bike like this. I thought they were just amazing.
It was very sports tourer, wasn't it?
It was definitely... It was amazingly slick looking and sleek and fast. I mean, yeah, it was beautiful, wasn't it? Fond memories of the ZZR11. But thanks for doing the speedy Google, Gremlin, on that one. Yeah. That's very handy. Make sure you keep that up because that's more information than I've got on my list here. Right, okay, let's move on. This is an interesting one, this next one, because this has a little bit more meaning to us in that one of our members owns one of these bikes, one of our chapter members. The Yamaha FZR 1000 came out in 1987 to 1988 was called the Genesis, and then from 89 to 95 was called the X-Up. Any ideas?
Why an X-Up? What does X-Up mean?
Right, X-Up was a Yamaha servo-assisted gas airflow valve in the exhaust pipe. Have I said that right, Pigpen?
Yeah, basically it was like a restrictor valve in the exhaust that sort of created back pressure.
That's right, at low revs. That's right, yeah. And then would open at higher revs.
Yeah, the faster it went, the X-up valve used to open up. It was a bit of a sticking point. They used to seize and...
That's right, yeah, I read that when I was doing a bit of research that they could be problematic and they'd get carbon deposits and start seizing up. So, but I remember I had a similar valve in an RD350 power valve. It was a similar sort of thing. And when you turned the ignition switch on, you'd hear that buzzing as it opened and closed, which was apparently to clean the valve off before you started the engine. Did the FZR do the same thing? Did it make that noise when you...
I'm trying to think. I think it did because it was servo.
Yeah, the servo. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So anyone know who in our chapter who owns one of these?
Well, I know Mad Max has just bought one, hasn't he?
That's right. Yes, he does. And he's promised me a go on it because out of all the 90s bikes, that's one of the only bikes that I never got to ride was the Yamaha FZR 1000. So he's promised me a go on it when he gets it up and running. He had a little bit...
This had an upside down fork.
Let me just...
Which would become a standard feature for all bikes in this class going forward.
Right, there you go. First upside down forks. Brilliant. And it was the first production bike with the Yamaha Delta box frame as well. Oh, and another interesting fact, 5-speed box, only 5 gears, which must have been bizarre because, you know, all bikes had six gears. Well, all the bikes I rode did. Obviously, in the 70s, it might have been different. 136 brake horsepower. 78 pound-foot of torque, and was the... Can you remember what the FZR had replaced, Pigpen? What had been its predecessor? Just out of interest, I've got it written down here.
No, I'm trying to think what it was.
It was the FZ 750, which weren't a pretty looking bike, were they? The FZRs were much nicer looking.
Yeah.
But yeah, with the red, white, and blue colours, the twin headlights, they were lovely. The Genesis and the Exit bikes. They went to a single headlight later on, didn't they? Sort of square headlight later on. Anything else you wanted to say about the FZR? Any memories about the FZR? Because they were slightly before my time, really. They'd disappeared off the scene, really, quite early. I mean, they did carry on until '95, but there weren't many people buying and riding them in the 90s. I don't think there was a few in the early 90s, but you did see them around.
Yeah, no, I remember a friend having one, and it was the very stereotypical red and white.
Yeah, red, white, and blue Yamaha. Not much blue, Yamaha. Mainly red and white.
Yeah, red and white with like Yamaha's colours in them days, and yeah, I always remember it. It was a pretty
formidable
bike.
Yeah.
It just looked pretty.
Yeah, very slick. Another slick bike. Right, okay, moving on to my next bike. And this was a explosion on the scene in 1992, this bike. We're onto the Honda CBR 900 Fireblade, which ran from 92 to 2003. And I don't think we can overstate the impact this bike had, can we?
The Fireblade?
Yeah. It was because it was such an amazing bike at the time. What Honda had done is they wanted to blow the FZR out of the water, didn't they? They wanted to take over and be the top selling sports bike. So what they did is they took a 900cc engine, put it in basically a 600cc frame, and it was 205 kilograms wet, which was only 2 kilograms heavier than the CBR6. Now, to put that into, compare it to the FZR, it was 34 kilograms lighter than the FZR. So we're talking a super light bike with masses of power, 110 brake horsepower. Incidentally, by 2000, the engine had reached 150 brake horsepower. So it was super powerful, super light.
How popular were Hondas with sports bikes before then?
What was the main sports bike that Honda had brought out before the Fireblade? I mean, it would have been the CBR 1000, wouldn't it? And the CBR 6.
There was that. I think the Fireblade was always intended to beat Suzuki. Suzuki had the GSXR
750 and 11 as well, didn't they?
Yeah, well, they set off with the 750 and the 11, which was in the slab side.
Yeah, the slingshot, yeah.
Which was sort of like 85. slab side, 86, 7, 8, 9 was the...
It definitely went into the 90s. They were definitely selling the slingshots in the 90s. My brother had one, and I'll remind you this. Could you remember this colour? I remember my brother opening his garage saying, "Look what I've got." He opened his garage up, and it was the black one. And imagine someone had got a spray can and just done a zigzag spray all the way along the bike in pink and a little bit of blue. And it was really garish. It was totally garish, but it looked amazing. And the slingshots looked like they were doing, 100 miles an hour when they were parked, didn't they? They always looked so cool, so fast looking.
Well, the sort of E-Reg slingshot was like the first. It was sort of one of the first production bikes that took its proper look from the racing bikes. It was like a bike you could buy. What they were racing, it was the rounded fairing, it looked like you were on a proper race bike then.
How expensive were these bikes back in the 90s?
That's one thing I didn't do, was write down prices. But I can tell you, I owned in 93 or 94, I owned a Fireblade, and I was only 23 years old at the time. And I was one of those young looking when I was 23, I probably looked 18 years old. And I was young looking, and I remember pulling up to Squires on my Fireblade, and it was the red, white and blue twin headlight, early model, K model, I think it was called. And turning up at Squires, taking my crash helmet off, and people looking at me like, what's that child doing riding one of the fastest bikes in the world? It was like you were a rock star in those days if you turned up on a Fireblade. Because they were very desirable, a lot of people wanted them.
Yeah.
But they were amazing. The Fireblades were absolutely amazing. Oh, I tell you another quick thing. The Urban Tiger. Do you remember the Urban Tiger Fireblade with the fox eye headlight? Guess who's got one of those?
Mad Manx.
Mad Manx has got one of those as well. He's got the FZ Thou and the Urban Tiger Fireblade. So he's got a lovely little collection going there, hasn't he? He's just bought another bike as well. He's bought the Hayabusa. So,
You can only ride one at once.
A Gen 1.
Okay, moving on. We're getting through these nicely. You couldn't really mention the Fireblade without mentioning the CBR 600, which started off in 1987 and came through the late 80s into the 90s. It's been on the go, really, ever since. I think they're still making CBR 600s now, aren't they? There was a major change in 2003. But my brother owned one of the early 80s F models that we called them the jelly molds. They had that enclosed fairing that had been based on the Ducati Peso, fully enclosed fairing, which meant you could jet wash them without, risking getting water into the engine. But the CBR 6s were super popular. They'd gone for a sort of in the middle sports tourer, commuter, did a bit of everything really. It wasn't a balls out racing bike, was it? It was a bit of a
it was first proper sports bike I ever rode was a CBR 600.
Was it? And I bet you thought it was the fastest thing ever, didn't you?
Hated it.
Really?
Yeah, didn't suit me. I don't know what it was. I didn't like it at all. Didn't have it long. Literally weeks.
Yeah.
And then I bought a GSXR 750.
Oh, that was a big jump up then. Big jump up.
Yeah. And that was me. Then I was sort of hooked on GSXRs from there. But the mid 90s CBRs started using the ram air system as well. And just out of interest, 85 brake horsepower I have here, 44 pound-foot of torque. So they had a lot of usable energy. They were a comfy bike. I owned one. I owned a CBR 6. My brother owned a couple of them. Did you know, out of interest again, that in the UK the CBR 900s were called the Fireblade. In America, the CBR 6s, it's never came to the UK, but for some reason in America only, the CBR 600s were known as Hurricanes. All right.
So the CBR 600 Hurricane, which I thought was pretty cool sounding.
Because then there was a branch off, wasn't there, where they did like the naked version of the CBR 600, which they called a Hornet.
Oh yeah,
and the Hornet.
Yeah.
Was sort of the naked, sort of Street Fighter-y type Yeah, my stepson had one of those as his first bike after passing his test. He got bored with it very quickly. But they were down-tuned, weren't they, for a bit more usable torque for commuting?
Yeah, it was more a sort of commutey type.
They looked a lot like the Bandits, didn't they? Very similar sort of look to the Bandit.
Again, it was Honda's sort of take on
the Suzuki
Bandit.
What is it with Honda and Suzuki? They're always battling it out, aren't they, Honda and Suzuki?
Yeah, I suppose in the day they were the ones, weren't they? They were the racing,
the big sellers,
the sort of racing boys.
Okay, so from Honda, if I can move on, we are now with the Kawasaki. Back to a Kawasaki. This time, the ZXR 750 came out in '89, all the way through to '95. And one thing I'll remember about the ZXRs here, the ZXR 750s, was those bizarre-looking vacuum hoses that ran from the front of the bike through near the handlebars and into the top of the tank that fed the airbox. And they were literally cut off a vacuum cleaner and glued on. That's what they looked like. They weren't. Yeah. I mean, some people love that look, I suppose. But what was your take on it, Pigpen?
Yeah, I did like them. Again, another friend, a couple of mates had them, but they sort of seemed to be able to buy them new. And again, I did like them, but back in the day it would cost, I suppose. But
104 brake horsepower. I remember them being quite heavy, though, if I recall. And another thing I've read about them, I don't remember this at the time, but I've read this in a few reviews that I've checked out, that apparently the back end were rock hard. They had bad linkage and a very poor shock. So the rear end of the bike was very, very stiff, and it was a bumpy ride, apparently. So fine for a racetrack that was silky smooth, but on the road, not a comfortable ride, apparently. I think I rode one or two. I don't really remember. But moving on from the ZXR, I just wanted very quickly to say that when in '96, the ZXR 750 had a big revision and they changed it to the ZX7, the ZX7 Ninja, which I owned. Many years later, I owned a ZX7. I always wanted one. They had the huge air scoops either side of the headlight. They were using the ram air system by then, and for me that was probably one of the most beautiful bikes of the '90s. I just thought that, again, another bike that looked like it was doing 100 mile an hour when it was parked up. You were either a JSXR guy or a ZXR guy, and the ZX7s looked lovely. I had one in the green and purple livery. The front end was green and the back end was purple, and it had like purple wheels, and just loved them. And Chris Walker had a lot of success on the ZX7s.
And what happened to yours?
What happened to mine? Well, I didn't own it too long. I bought it. I was going to come back to this story later because it's relevant in something later on. But very quickly, I bought it, spent a lot of money doing it up, and then sold it at a huge loss. So that's the story on that's my ZX7 story. But I did love riding that bike. Right.
Yeah, well,
anything else you want to add to that, Pigpen?
Not so much on the ZX7, just on about the ZX range as such. It was the
go ahead.
ZX10 I always wanted.
That was the forerunner to the ZZR, wasn't it?
Yeah, the new ZX10.
Oh, the new, yes, yeah, right.
Yeah, right. We were. I remember we were going around Croft Circuit, and they'd just come out of the ZX10s, and I was on a GSXR 600, and my mate was on an NC 400 Honda, and we thought we're quick. Yeah, and I remember these two ZX10s came past us. I thought we'd both stop.
Time to retire.
They were going so quick. It was, and I remember going into the pits afterwards and having a look at these two bikes and thinking, "Oh, that's the future." Is that's? And
now you know how I feel when I go riding out with you two.
No, we don't go fast. Well, Pigpen goes a bit fast, but I don't. Right, okay, let's move on to the next bike. Now, this one is a massive departure. The next one on my list is not a sports bike gremlin.
Wow, but it's not a Harley either.
It's not a Harley. It's the BMW R1100 GS, which was out in 94 all the way to 99. And this one is what they classed as a dual sport bike, which later they redubbed as adventure bikes. It was the first real adventure bike. The 1100s were very, very popular in the 90s. And obviously they went from the 1100 onto the revised to the 1150, which was the one used by Ewan McGregor and Charlie Bowman in the long way round. And then again, another revision to the 1200, which is one that I owned, and now the 1250. But they're boxer engines, flat twins. They were oil-cooled as well as air-cooled, which was the first change in the BMW engines for motorcycles since 1923.
Right.
They'd been using that same engine that long. But here's an interesting fact for the nerds out there. Telelever front suspension, which is basically like having a swinging arm on the front of the bike. So the forks, I don't believe the forks have any springs in, do they? They have this telelever system with a monoshock at the front of the engine. So apparently the idea behind it is it prevents fork dive when under heavy braking. But there you go. So so that went from the 11 to the 1150 GS for the long way around, and then the 12, and now the beautiful 1250 GSs that are out there. What are your memories of the GS, Pigpen?
There was never a bike I fancied. It wasn't for me. And the only memories I have, a good friend, we used to do a lot of enduro riding, and he set up a lot of events. And we did one event up in Kilda Forest, and it was called the Kilda Rally, and it was for all the rally bikes, and most of them were. This is pre when they changed them to the 450s.
Yeah.
And it was when the Paris Dakar sort of rally bike stuff was any size they wanted. And there used to be a lot of the GSs there. And there
was a lot more of the GSs than any of the other.
There were leery looking things when they were doing 100 mile an hour on gravel.
Yes, I remember you telling me that story a few weeks back.
Yeah, scary. Because they weren't the slick KTM, 900 and 960 things that KTM were producing. They were the big old flat boxer engines with the big crash barrier frames round and
hewn out of solid granite, weren't they? Those things?
Yeah, just sort of a big old lump of bike. But no, I was never quite into that adventure bike. I was more the sort of enduro KTM sort of bike. More lightweight.
Yeah. I love the 1200 that I had, as I mentioned in the last episode. I got really into it, did a lot of miles on it, super comfy, ride them all day. I mean, to be honest, you can't. They're not off-road bikes. You can't go scrambling on them. They're too heavy. You just sink. But green laning is fine, and a bit of gravel and that. They can cope. They've got the knobbly tires on, and brilliant. I loved them. What are your thoughts on the adventure bikes, Gremlin? You like?
I quite like them. I wouldn't have one, but I quite like them.
Yeah, the Triumph Tigers are a nice alternative to the Beamers, aren't they? We've got a couple of guys that have the. Bobby's got the Tiger, Triumph Tiger Explorer.
Yes, and there's a potential new candidate who's got a Triumph Tiger, the Adventurer.
All right. Okay, let's move on. Right, next bike we've got on the list. Oh, this is a good one. You're going to like this one. It's not Japanese. Okay.
Ducati Monster.
No, the Ducati 916, 1994 to 1998. Now, this was another bike, a bit like the Fireblade. It really threw the cat amongst the pigeons. It was a follow-up to the 888.
Now, it's my understanding that people with Ducatis had money.
They were expensive, yeah.
They
were the Ferrari of the bike world.
Yes.
Fair to say. Now, these, just to give you a little rundown, big V-twin engines, 1000cc, well, 916, obviously, V-twin, fuel-injected, desmodromic engines, which I love that word, desmodromic.
And do you know who designed it?
Oh, no, I don't. You probably have looked it up, have you?
Massimo Tamburini.
Tamburini.
Everybody beats their Tamburini, don't they?
Desmodromic then is the name used for an engine that uses cams not only to open the valves but close the valves. So instead of having springs closing your valves, it uses cams, which means the valves can stay open longer and that's what creates that lovely Ducati Desmodromic sound that they make. So
did they sell it in any other colour apart from red?
They did
black and yellow.
Yeah, and didn't they do like a charcoaly grey for the Senna, the special 916 Senna? It was like a charcoaly battleship grey colour, I believe, as well. But
I'm sure there was a bright yellow.
Yeah, there was. The 748s they definitely did in yellow, but yeah, you're probably right. But who would buy anything other than the red? I mean, if you're going to buy a Ducati, you'd surely buy that red, wouldn't you? Yeah. But they were beautiful.
Yeah, but I remember not being a sports bike fan, but absolutely loving these Ducatis. Yeah, and I really wanted to own one.
It was the whole tubular frame, single-sided swinging arm.
Yeah,
and there was always that talk of it was designed. If you looked at it from the top down, it was meant to be like the shape or the outline of a lady.
Of a lady, yeah. I can. Yeah, I
think that was sort of meant to be its look sort of thing with the twin exhaust of the legs and then the nipped in for the seat of the waist.
Italians know how to design cars and motorcycles, don't they? I mean, they look incredible. Like you said, the tubular trellis frame, single-sided swinging arm, also had the upside-down forks. And one thing that I always loved about them was those upswept underseat pipes that came, those twin pipes that came up. And you could get those Terminoni carbon cans that sounded absolutely incredible. And this was said to be the most beautiful bike ever made. Apparently.
Apart from the Harley Davidson.
I mentioned this to Vicky, and Vicky said, why? Why was it considered the most beautiful bike? And it's a hard question to answer. I mean, if you're not moved when you look at a Ducati, the same way as you might be moved when you look at a Lamborghini or Ferrari, then I guess you've got cold blood in your veins, haven't you?
Yeah. Of its day, like you say, it was the Ferrari of the bike world.
Yeah.
What can you tell us? Pigpen, what can you tell our listeners about the dry Ducati clutch?
The Ducati? That's all he could tell you. I always knew when there was a Ducati around because it just sat there rattling itself to bits. But
yes, they sounded rattly, didn't they, on tickover? Once they got moving, they were fine, but at very low revs in traffic and on tickover, my God, the noise they used to make, it was like a bucket of bolts being thrashed about, wasn't it? Yeah.
Even when we're on the track, if there was any sort of if anybody turned up with one of them, it was a very distinctive sound. There was nothing else.
What, like nuts and bolts being thrown all over the track, you mean?
No, I don't know. It just had a very much a sound of its own. Yeah. Even for that sort of twin, like the Millie was the same type of engine, but completely different sounding.
That's because the Melee wasn't a Desmodromic engine. It's the Desmo engine that made that sound, isn't it?
Just had a very distinctive sound.
Would you be surprised that by the end of '94, virtually every magazine hailed the 916 as the bike of the year?
Yeah,
they were very popular.
Wouldn't be surprised at all.
They're very expensive. 114 brake horsepower, 60 foot-pound-foot, 194 kilograms dry. I don't know what they were wet. Probably, around about 205 kilograms. But also worth mentioning that they were the Superbike champions in 94, 95, and 96. Carl Fogarty on the 916, and in 98, Troy Corsa. So it won the manufacturer in all 4 of those years as well. The manufacturer.
It had that big following, didn't it? Because of Foggy. Good old Brit Foggy on one sort of thing. It became a bit of an icon.
I met Carl Fogarty once.
Yeah, I've met him a couple of times.
Yeah, charity ball in Bolton one year.
Nice chap, nice. Yeah, nice
it was very nice. Yeah.
Okay, right, let's crack on. We're getting towards the end of this list now. Right, next bike on my list. This is a bit of a damp squib. I think some of you may agree. I hope I haven't upset anyone that owns one of these bikes. The next bike on the list is the Yamaha YZF 1000 Thunder Ace, 1996 to 2003. And why
took over from the YZF 750?
It did, yeah. And it was the Yamaha's sort of strike back at the Fireblade, wasn't it? Really, after the Fireblade took over from the FZ1000, Yamaha thought, right, well, we need to bring out something new and something to compete with the Honda. And they brought out the Thunder Ace. And what do you think, Pigpen?
The old thunderclap. It was numb. Yeah. It was big, fat, numb.
Enough
slow.
about you, Pigpen. Let's talk about the bike, please.
Yeah. No, it was. Yeah. No.
It was an
FZR.
It was an FZR 1000 engine with light and crank and pistons. It still had the X up in it, and they used an adapted YZF 750 frame. Power-wise, it was pretty good. It was 145 brake horsepower, which was pretty good for the year that it came out, 96, 71 pound-foot of torque. But it was 232 kilograms, which, you know, again, 30 plus kilograms heavier than the Blade.
It was a big lump of bike. I remember sort of playing with them on the roads when we were, just riding on the roads, and
heavy.
Once they got going, they'd go, but they were big and numbing corners.
Do you think, Pigpen, that Yamaha put the Thunder Ace out as like a stopgap before they released the R1? They were still working and developing the R1, and they thought, we've got to get something out more modern than the FZR, because the FZR is a 1980s bike essentially, and they maybe thought, let's get something out to sell while we're finishing off the development on the R1. Do you think they really thought it was a competitor? It was a competitive bike against the Blade?
Well, I think they must have done, because development costs would have been millions. So, they didn't come to it lightly. Yeah. But I think, when you put the R1 next to it, you do have chalk and cheese thing. Sort of thing.
It was very quick. The Thunder Ace, as I remember, came out as the sort of flagship sports bike, but was very quickly sort of pushed into like the sports tourer category, wasn't it?
Yeah, because did they do the 600 or 1,000?
They did the 600 Cat, the Thunder Cat, which is next on my list. So we'll move straight on to that.
Sorry,
while we're on a roll.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. They brought out alongside the Thunder Ace, the 600 version, as you say, which was the Thunder Cat, which came out in the same year, 96, and actually continued a little bit longer than the Thunder Ace. The Thunder Ace was done and dusted by 2003, whereas the Cat continued to along to 2007 and was actually sold alongside the R6. Which seems odd that they carried on selling it when they had the R6 out at the same time.
Yeah. Again, I don't actually think I know anybody who ever owned one.
No. They were. So I rode a few of them, and they were the follow-up to the FZR. They were made to compete with the CBR 600, which wasn't going to happen. It wasn't going to be a genuine competitor against CBR, although maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they were bigger sellers abroad than they were in the UK. But they looked very much like the CBR in that they had the dual seats, and they were more sort of bottom end power. They were low revving, high torque engines, which meant they were great for commuting and town riding.
I'm going to say I think it was very much a commuter bike, wasn't it?
It wasn't the sort of bike you saw on track days, was it?
No. The CBR 600 seemed to get a bit of a following on the track day sort of scene. But yeah, that really didn't.
And I'll tell you another thing, the colour schemes were boring, weren't they? They did like a yellow and silver and a red and silver, and they were just really boring colour schemes. I mean, power-wise, 100 brake horsepower bikes. And they were probably quite underrated, really, because they were very rideable, but they didn't get any pulses racing at all, did they?
No. Like you say, when they brought the R6 out and the R1 out, then all of a sudden...
all bets were off.
Yeah, people sort of sat up and listened, but I don't know. It wasn't a good stopgap between the X-Up and the R1.
And the R1, yeah. Okay, next bike. We're back to a mothership now. Honda. Back to a Honda CBR 1100 XX Super Blackbird. That's a mouthful, isn't it? 1996 to 2007, Honda's reply to the ZZR 1100. And this became the fastest production bike for the next 2 years, topping 178 miles per hour. Any ideas what this bike was named after, Gremlin?
Probably the US fighter jet Blackbird.
The SR-71, the Lockheed. I thought they were British. Weren't they British, the Blackbirds?
No.
They were American.
Definitely not. Yeah.
Yeah, the Lockheed SR-71.
It's like Harley Davidson's American.
Right, okay, yeah. God, he's crowbarring Harley Davidson every which way but loose, isn't he? But
well, that's how they met into it, with a crowbar.
So what can we say about the Super Blackbird? It was fast. That's about it, really. 132 brake horsepower. Quite a torquey engine at 78 pound-foot. 223 kilograms dry.
Do you remember these came with the dual braking system? I think they were one of the first bikes that Honda used the dual braking. So you apply a little front, you get a little rear coming on automatically and vice versa.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? I wasn't a big fan.
The whole bike, I wasn't a big fan. I remember riding one. It was big, it was numb, it was smooth, it was...
Super smooth Honda, big Honda engine,
it was very much typical Honda. It did what it said on the tin. Everything about it was almost boring. It was smooth and fast, but there was no, I don't know, it didn't really scare you in any way. It wasn't.
No, and the colour schemes again, it was basically black or grey.
Black.
And that was pretty much it, wasn't it? You know.
Yeah.
I did like the look of the Blackbird. I thought they looked very futuristic. I rode one a couple of times. They were super fast. They were basically a modern, an updated version of ZZR11, though, weren't they? They were a bit faster and a bit lighter.
Yeah.
But if that's your thing, I suppose, you know, they were gonna. They like I say, they took over the mantle of the fastest production bike, but they didn't hold it for long, did they? Didn't hold it for long.
Yeah, it was in that era of you either had the handy, nimble racing sports bike, or you had
the mothership,
powerful, sport-looking but more touring, sort of genteel, more gentlemanly.
It's a motorway bike, a motorway cruncher.
You had the gentleman who rode the 1100 stuff, and you had the
lunatics that rode the 9s and the 1000s and the 750s.
And the 750 type thing. And it was very much that, you know, you sort of looked at them and thought, in 20 years, 30 years time, maybe.
yeah.
You know.
I know what you mean. Right, moving on. The next bike on my list, we actually scrapped from the list because we've decided that this particular brand could do with an episode all of its own. Because the next bike on my list was the Triumph Daytona T595, which came out in '97. But we're not going to go into that in any detail because, Pigpen banned me from mentioning them. So he said, no, we'll talk about Triumph another time. So that's that.
Why?
Well, they weren't big sellers, were they? They were. I mean, they stood out because they were different. They were the rebirth of Triumph, but
they had a following. I think they still have a following. There's, you know, they're still out there, and you know,
unlike my Harley Davidson that everybody follows.
Only on the back of an AA truck, but anyway.
I mean, there's a big story to tell about Triumph because we've got all that history. They went quiet during the 70s when the Japanese bikes took over, and this was their comeback bike, wasn't it? Really, the Daytona, the earlier Daytona, the triple. I had the 900 triple, and they did the 1200 4. But then this came out, and this was like their new sleek tubular frame, single-sided swinging arm. They were a nice looking bike, but
I did test ride one, a new one. Yes, it was okay.
I like triples. I mean, the thing about a triple is you've got the grunt of the twin, but you've got the power of a 4. It's sort of a mixture of two. You've got the best of both worlds with a triple, haven't you? I like riding triples.
Yeah. I still like the inline 4, sort of high revving, screaming engines at that time, rather than. Yeah, I wasn't into that sort of triple or V twin.
So you'd never have bought a big Ducati then, big V twin Ducati.
No,
or the Miele.
No. A good friend had a Miele, and I took that out for a ride, and I just couldn't. I couldn't get on with it because
it's a different thing. I mean, you'd been riding inline 4 GSXRs around tracks for years. There's no way you're going to be able to adapt very quick. It'd take a long time to change your riding style.
You're having to change gear, so in such a different place you're pulling through the gears rather than
short shifting shifting and using the torque out of corners and stuff. But anyway, we're not supposed to be talking about these Triumph Daytonas. We will dedicate an episode, or certainly a segment in an episode, to Triumph, and we'll go through a bit of history. Right, we're finishing off now. We've got 2 more bikes to go, and we're going to talk about them simultaneously to a certain degree because they're both Yamaha. One is the
R1 and the R6.
R1 and the R6. Yeah. What do you know about the R1 and the R6, Gremlin? Because they are later bikes and they still make them now, so you must have seen them around.
Yeah, I have, because you think about there's two of our members that have R1s. There's Buzz and Compo.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, Compo's got an early model. Buzz has got a slightly newer model, hasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, you think about it, that it was the R6 came first and then the R1 in the same chassis. So going from a 600 to 1,000 cc must have really blown the socks off quite a few of the other bikes out there.
And it definitely was a big change to the Thunder Race, which the Yamaha fans had been riding prior to the R1. And that another massive, the R1 had a huge impact, like the Blade had 6 years earlier. Very sleek, very small for 1,000 cc. They stacked the gearbox, shortened the wheelbase, lowered the center of gravity, it was a racing bike on the road. It really was. Again, still using the X-Up system. It had the upside down forks. At this point, early on, the early models were still using carburetors. They hadn't gone fuel injected just yet, but they had. They were the first bike I can remember that used digital speedos, which I never was a fan of digital speedos. I like to actually see a needle rotating around a clock rather than a digital. When I rode bikes with digital speedos, I couldn't stop looking down at the speedo for some reason, which obviously you don't want. 150 brake horsepower at the crank, 129 at the rear wheel, 72 pound-foot of torque, and only 198 kilograms. So the R1 was a mega bike. I mean, it really, people could get into trouble with an R1 if they weren't experienced.
I still say it was Yamaha's answer to the GSX-R 1000, which was out before that. Right. It was them playing. They were playing catch up.
Yeah,
trying to,
They were competing against the Blade and the GSX-R 1000, like you said, and I mean that is. I think it's fair to say they kind of took the mantle, didn't they? They took the sports bike sort of champion. They took that sort of title, didn't they? Really?
Yeah, they had a big following at the time. I do remember at the time on my old 750, and quite a few mates were all of a sudden sort of jumping ship and buying the R1 because it was, it looked nice and shiny and sleek, and it was quite a bit thinner than the GSX-Rs at the time.
It was. I remember one thing. I remember. I mean, I owned the Blade, and when you sat on the Blade, they had huge petrol tanks. So you looked down, and there was this massive petrol tank. Not on the R1. When you sat on the R1, it was like it felt like you were sat on like a 400cc bike. They were just tiny, and you were right over the handlebars, weren't you? Sat right over the handlebars.
Yeah. I think the very first time I saw one was at the old Squires when it was down in the.
Yeah.
In the village. In the village
itself, near the crossroads there, and I remember this lad had a brand spanking new one, and he had his girlfriend on the back, and she was in like black leather trousers and black, all in black, long legs, and she was just sat. She was sat on the back of this bike, and I just remember it. She looked like she was sat on nothing.
Yeah.
There was hardly any seat. It was just like this little pointy bit.
Little
at the
shelf.
back, and it was,
little shelf sticking out. Yeah.
And I remember last I had up back of mine at the time, she was like, well, you don't be getting one of them. You won't be catching me sat on that thing.
Yeah.
And there was nothing. It was just, really thin, sleek.
Like a 250. Looked like a 250, didn't it?
It was just like it looked fast.
Yeah. But, and they were, weren't they? I mean, they were 180 mile an hour bikes.
It were a quick bike in the right hands, but it was.
And the R6. Again, sorry, Pigpen. The R6 as well. A massive explosion with the R6, took over from the CBR6, took over from all the 600s. I mean, the Yamahas ruled that market, the 1000 and the 600 market, didn't they? Certainly for a few years.
They were in very, very close battle again with the GSX-R. That had the 6, the 750, and the
because the GSX-R, Suzuki brought the 600 out, didn't they? Which they had stuck to a 750 and an 11, and obviously the 1000.
Yeah.
But then they started bringing out the 600s in this country as well as America, didn't they? So,
well, again, they had to compete with. You had the CBR 600, and they had the Yamaha 600s. So,
Oh, special mention as well. We've talked about slingshots, but I would like to mention the S-Rads that came out in '96. That was the next big development for Suzuki. They were the answer to the Fireblade question I have here in my notes. 20 kilogram weight decreased to 179 kilograms. So the GSX-R 750 S-Rad was an amazing bike as well. So to our, very quickly then, to our listeners out there, have we missed anything out? Is there any bikes on this list that you think was a massively popular, iconic 90s bike that we haven't talked about, that you owned maybe, or that you always wanted to own? Drop us an email if you can think of anything, and we'll mention it in the next episode. Okay, that was I enjoyed that segment, guys. That was good fun talking about the bikes, a bit of nostalgia. Our next segment we have, well, I'm going to introduce my co-host Gremlin, who's going to take over on this one. So Gremlin, what's the next segment all about?
Well, if I read out part of a film script, it might give it away as a clue. The Holy Grail neath ancient Roslyn waits, the blade and chalice guarding o'er her gates. Adorned in master's loving art she lies, she rests at last beneath the starry skies.
Wow.
Now there's a big clue there. The film was...
The Da Vinci Code. Is that from the book? Or...
It is. It's the final clue that is given allegedly outside Westminster Abbey, but it's actually Lincoln Cathedral, when what's his name, Lee Teabing, is arrested and taken away, and he says, "Robert, you found it. You found the clue." And the clue
who gets arrested and taken away?
Lee Teabing.
Is that the guy? Is that played by Ian McKellen?
Ian McKellen, yes.
Right. Yes, I remember. Yeah.
So Robert Langdon has the clue, and it's about
Rosslyn Chapel near Edinburgh.
Roslyn Chapel. So there you go. Rosslyn Chapel is a remarkable and magical place. It's very big within the Freemasonry world. It links Christianity and ancient Celtic folklore and temporalism Freemasonry. It was built by the latter William St. Clair and already proven itself to be hugely important because it was the construction of this edifice that provided the interface between the Templars and Freemasonry.
Templar Knights. Just to add very quickly before we go any further, the reason we're talking about Roslyn Chapel is because we are planning a chapter ride there, hopefully sometime this year.
We are. Roslyn Chapel itself is not far from Edinburgh, and the history goes back to, as we say, to when was it built? 16, 15, 14?
1540. Yeah, it's 1540
or something.
Yeah.
But it's quite interesting because if you take a look at the history, forgetting the Freemasonry links with it, one of the things they state about it was the Lord Protector who protected Roslyn. Perhaps the most remarkable evidence to support our view of Roslyn is that it is still there at all. During the English Civil War, Cromwell and his parliamentary forces roamed Ireland, Wales and Scotland, as well as England, bringing damage to royalist and Catholic property wherever they could. Cromwell himself visited Roslyn, and whilst he destroyed every papist church he came across, he did not so much as scratch this building. The official line, as told by us, is that he was a Freemason of high standing and was aware that Roslyn was a Masonic shrine. And for once, we fully agree with the present caretakers that state that. So
wow.
There you go.
Wow, what a story. So he was allegedly a Mason, had been on a warpath destroying churches and decided that as that had Masonic links, he was going to leave it alone.
Absolutely.
Crazy.
Well, just a quick one there. 11th of September, 1456.
There you go. Well done.
That was when they broke ground, I believe, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's what it said, established. So.
Right, right.
Now, for those of you in the province of Yorkshire West riding, you will probably have heard the name Brother Dr. Robert Lomas. Now, I first came across Brother Dr. Robert Lomas in the late 90s when a book came out called The Hiram Key, which was written by himself and Stephen Knight. And Brother Lomas came to my lodge, Harlow Lodge, and did this presentation of the Hiram Key. And it was fantastic. I mean, I've got the book as a Kindle edition, and it's extremely interesting. And from Brother Dr. Robert Lomas himself, The Origins of Freemasonry, a lecture given on the 25th of August 2000 at the 5th International Conference of Great Priories at Albert's Hall, Stirling, Scotland. And what he states is about the origins of Freemasonry and where did Freemasonry start. Freemasonry in the form we would recognise today started at the building of Roslyn Chapel near Edinburgh. There are three important pieces of evidence which support his statement. One, Roslyn links the Jewish temple through the Knights Templar to Freemasonry. The ground plan of Roslyn is a copy of Herod's temple, and above ground it replicates the Herodian architecture of Jerusalem. And thirdly, Roslyn contains the oldest document showing a modern first-degree ceremony being conducted by a Knight Templar.
Well, I'll be. And there are Templar Knights buried in the crypt.
There are absolutely. But then you take a look at alternatives. You know, where was Roslyn Chapel? Where did it first appear in modern history? Do you know? Apart from the Da Vinci Code,
No idea. Anything to do with Henry VIII?
no. Batman.
Go on. What's the story? In a comic strip, was it? Or
Yeah, it was. So, the chapel became the subject of speculation regarding its supposed connection with the Knights Templar of Freemasonry beginning in the 1980s. This part of its history was referenced in the DC Comics storyline Batman, Scottish Connection, in which the hero Batman becomes caught up in an old vendetta between two Scottish clans during a visit to Scotland. This mystery including the discovery of an ancient treasure trove hidden in Rosslyn.
wow.
Yeah, and then of course, move forward nearly 20 years to the Da Vinci Code in 2003. You know, it just turned everybody's attention to Rosslyn Chapel, those who were not in the Masonic world. And the visitor numbers shot through the roof because of this. And I think it's made it... was it a victim of its own success? They've had to put, you know, I think there's ticketing systems now. You've got to not make an appointment, but book a slot to be able to turn up. And obviously more important now with COVID and what will happen when they reopen, will, you know, how will we go about visiting it? And that's one of the challenges we have this year with our ride out, is actually going to Rosslyn, booking in the time slot and be able to spend enough time looking round.
I remember when I went, because I went a few years ago, I remember they had a lady there doing the talk and giving the history. And she said pre-Da Vinci Code, I'll probably get my numbers wrong here, but pre-Da Vinci Code movie, they were getting maybe, you know, the foot traffic of about 5,000 per year. And post Da Vinci Code, it went up to like 150,000 a year, something ridiculous. I mean, it, you know, tenfold the number of visitors that were coming through there. But I mean, imagine the money they're taking, because the ticket price for getting in isn't cheap.
No, absolutely. It probably would be very expensive. But, you know, what is the rumour about Rosslyn Chapel itself? Why is there this mystique about it? And for those of you who know the story about it and the crypt itself, if we go back to the Da Vinci Code, what was the Holy Grail? Well, it was the bloodline, wasn't it, of Mary Magdalene, and allegedly there is something, someone, is it treasure, is it the Holy Grail, is it the sarcophagus that is buried in the vaults? And so far, the family, the St. Clair family, have never given permission for the vaults to be opened up.
Wow.
Is it because there is something there and they don't want it found? Or is it because there isn't anything there and they don't want the mystique to suddenly disappear?
I think the movie has some story about the Holy Grail not being a cup that Christ drank from at the Last Supper, but it was the
female bloodline.
Yeah, sangreal as in blood,
yep.
Grail being blood, and the holy bloodline, and that Mary Magdalene and Jesus had a child, and so it went down the
Yes, absolutely.
And the secret is held in the crypt at Rosslyn Chapel. But I mean,
absolutely.
I've been, and there are. It's the most beautifully sculpted and decorated church I've ever been in. I mean, the masonry in there is absolutely amazing. I mean, there are forget-me-nots on the ceiling, and Have you heard the story about the Apprentice Pillar?
Yes.
Do you want to run through that?
Do you know the Apprentice Pillar?
Well, the Apprentice Pillar story, as I remember it, and bearing in mind it's about 4 years since I've been to Roslyn Chapel, but the lady that was doing the talk told us the story of the Apprentice Pillar. Now, there is one particular pillar. I think there's 3 or 4 pillars inside the church, but one particular pillar is very ornately carved. It's like almost like rope running around, a cable tow running around the column up to the top, with roots at the bottom like a tree, some fauna at the top like a tree. And the story is that the person that was paying, I guess the Sinclair family that were paying for this to be built, had a master mason on site that was doing all the ornate carving, and they asked for a particular style that was popular in Europe. They wanted a particular style of carving, sculpting on one of the pillars that the master mason wasn't that familiar with. So he had decided to travel to Europe and learn these techniques, learn this new style, come back and carve it and sculpt it into this particular pillar. While he was away, I mean, I guess in those days, if you traveled to Europe and to study, you'd be away for a couple of years minimum, wouldn't you?
Yes.
And the story has it that while he was away, his apprentice took it upon himself to begin sculpting this pillar. And during the 2 to 3 years that the master mason was away, when he arrived back, the apprentice had completed the pillar, made the most beautiful carving and sculpting that had been seen for years by anyone around. And the master mason was, hugely jealous, very angry. How dare his apprentice show him up? So he took his heavy gavel and bashed him over the head with it and killed his own apprentice. Now, in a fit of rage, obviously, he was afterwards arrested, prosecuted, and sentenced to hang or whatever was the punishment in those days. But as a secondary punishment, apparently there are faces carved on the walls of the church. One is the apprentice that was murdered. One is the apprentice's mother, with tears streaming down her face, and the third face is the master mason, who is carved facing the pillar so that he has to stare at his apprentice's creation for all eternity.
Wow, there you go. Now, if we move on from Robert Lomas, who states that Rosslyn Chapel is very Masonic and with the Templars, there's another one to state that it absolutely isn't. And there's a chap called Cooper, Robert L.D. Cooper, curator of the Grand Lodge of Scotland Museum and Library. And he has stated that it's absolute nonsense and calls it the Roslyn hoax. Roslyn Chapel bears no more resemblance to Solomon or Herod's temple than a house brick does to a paperback book. If you superimpose the floor plans of Roslyn Chapel and either Solomon's or Herod's temple, you will actually find that they're not even remotely similar. Writers admit that the chapel is far smaller than either of the temples. They freely scale the plans up and down in an attempt to fit them together. What they actually find are no significant similarities at all. If you superimpose the floor plans of Roslyn Chapel on the east choir of Glasgow Cathedral, you will find a startling match. The 4 walls of both buildings fit precisely. The East Choir, and choir is Q-U-I-R-E, of Glasgow, is larger than Roslyn, but the designs of these 2 medieval Scottish buildings are virtually identical. So there you go. As to a possible connection between the St. Clairs and the Knights Templar, the family testified against the Templars when that order was put on trial in Edinburgh in 1309. Historian Dr. Louise Yeoman, along with other medieval scholars, says the Knights Templar connection is false, and points out that Roslyn Chapel was built by William Sinclair so that Mass could be said for the souls of his family. It is also claimed that the other carvings in the chapel reflect Masonic imagery, such as the way that hands are placed in various figures. One carving may show a blindfolded man being led forward with a noose around his neck, similar to the way a candidate is prepared for initiation into Freemasonry. The carving has been eroded by time and pollution and is difficult to make out clearly. The chapel was built in the 15th century, and the earliest records of free Masonic lodges date back only to the late 16th and early 17th century. There you go. One for, one against. But it's up to everybody to make up their own mind. And that's the wonderful thing about, freedom of people's individual choices.
Yeah, so and it's the beauty of our fraternity is that we have these mysteries. So.
Yeah, it is, because That's what it's about. A society with secrets rather than a secret society.
Well said.
I still believe it.
I do. I like to believe it. I mean, there are definitely Templar Knights there, and there's no doubt there are links from the Templar Knights to Masonry as we know it now. So, open mind. Can I just ask quickly, from a visiting point of view, I had a little look on my maps, and it looks. I mean, I've done this trip before, up to Newcastle, and then A68, and that takes us up through Jedburgh to Edinburgh.
Yeah, Jedburgh, Coldstream, that way.
Beautiful
Absolutely.
roads, absolutely lovely roads, and I guess we'll stop in a travel lodge somewhere up at Edinburgh and have a night out, and then head down to the Rosslyn. Yeah, well, they might let us stay. You never know. But yeah, good research there. Good information. Yeah. I enjoyed that.
It's very interesting, for people trying to understand Ridecast itself. It's about motorbikes and masonry. The two loves that we all have, is our Freemasonry, but also the motorbikes, and to be able to understand a bit about the Masonic history as well. For those of you who aren't Freemasons, what do you know about it? Write in. Do you believe all these stories? Do we want to take over the world? Do we rule the world? All the usual myths and popular. Apparently, if you go back to the beginning of the pandemic in the UK, where there was a bit of relaxation, I think it was Piers Morgan. Somebody actually went up to my shop and said it was a Masonic conspiracy. It was the Freemasons that had started COVID.
They blame us for everything, don't they? Yeah, we don't control everything. We just control the important things.
We do.
The best one was the Simpsons episode, wasn't it?
Oh, the Stonecutters.
Yeah, I think that has to be.
That's
the iconic,
brilliant, isn't it?
The iconic image of.
Yeah, the parody of Masonry.
Yeah.
Yes, there we have it.
The final part of the show. This is actually a new segment, guys, which I'm hoping will become a regular segment in the show. It's essentially what you would call email corner, where we discuss the questions, the emails that we've been sent in from listeners. So it's nice to get a little bit of feedback and a few questions, and know that people are not only listening to us but can be bothered to send in a few questions. But I thought, what are we going to call this? What Pigpen's messing with his graphics on his Zoom meeting now. He's got a pig nose and pig ears. Anyway,
how about we call it Fans Forum?
Fans Forum. Oh dear. Well, I was thinking, I've got something set up here that you might find amusing. I was thinking that we could call it Yakka's Yakety Yak. Right? I know it's a terrible name.
Well, like Yakka's load of crap.
No, Yakka's Yakety Yak. Do you want to hear my jingle? I've made a jingle.
Not particularly.
Right, well, you're going to hear it. Here we go.
Yakety Yak.
Let me play it again.
Oh, please stop.
Okay, so we're not going to be calling it Yakka's Yakety Yak. I was thinking, what about, as we're Masons, how about quarterly communications? Or is that just too numb, too boring?
Numb and boring.
What about Ride Talk? Ride Talk. We do a good jingle for that. Or, do you know what we could actually do, thinking about it? We could get the listeners
Fans Forum.
No, let's get the listeners to suggest a title for us. We'll get them to send in what they think we should call our email corner section.
The last time anyone was asked to name something, they came up with Boaty McBoatface. And let's just see what you get back with.
David Plowie. Okay, so anyway, we've got a few questions here. First of all, an email from Jason. Hello, Jason. Thanks for emailing the show.
Not his real name.
He said that he enjoyed the show and that he had a laugh listening to us all making fun of each other. But I'm not going to read out
first time caller, long time listener.
Yeah, but I'm not going to read out any more praise, because there's nothing worse than people reading out praise for their own show. So I won't be doing that. But what Jason has done is he's actually sent us a meme. It's basically making fun of the white wall tires conversation we had last month. So it's, rather than try and describe it, if I send that across to you, Gremlin, can you stick it on the Instagram, or I'll stick it on the Facebook page?
Yeah, absolutely.
From Jason. So thanks, Jason. Keep them coming.
For those of you who don't know what a meme is, myself included, can you tell us what a meme is?
It's a photograph with some amusing text written over the top of it. Check out the Instagram account and you'll see what a meme is, because Gremlin's going to post it for us. Right. I have a message here from Alex, and this says, what is the most stupid thing you have ever done? I'm assuming
he's bought a Harley Davidson.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, I'm assuming he means on a motorcycle, but yeah, buying a Harley, I guess, for you, Gremlin.
No, mine was actually dropping up my foot and breaking it in 3 places when I was about to take my test.
That's right. Yeah, we spoke about that last month, didn't we? What about you, Ben?
Yeah. There's been 1 or 2 sort of memorable crashes.
You've never ridden a motorbike naked or anything like that, have you?
No, I have seen it. No, we used to go down to the British Superbikes every year, and we used to go down for the night before there were a big party, and I do remember things like that happening. I think what's the silliest thing I've done as a youth with living on a farm, I had a Honda XL 175S, and me and a mate decided it'd be good to do some jumps on it. And one thing led to one thing led to another. And I had an old Mini we used to ride around the farm on as well. And the jumps got bigger, and it involved in the end the Mini being brought into this. I think we'd seen
our very own Evil Knievel.
Yeah, I think we'd seen. I think we'd watched the White Helmets, if anybody remembers the
Yeah,
White
yeah,
Helmets
the Royal Signals.
stunt team.
Yeah.
We'd watched them doing these sort of stunts, and he was stood on the back of the bike at one time, and we were trying to pull wheelies. Anyway, we did this jump, and it all went well for so many times over until I think the takeoff ramp sort of moved, and next thing it flipped over, hit the back of the bike, and I ended up trying to do a 360 as I did the thing, but landed upside down with the bike on top of me and broke my arm. So,
oh dear.
That was a stupid thing as a child. And then probably as an adult, I seem to remember trying to do a wheelie over a speed hump.
Right. And that bucked you, threw you off, did it?
Yeah, I was sat on the tarmac and the bike disappeared off to the top of the road.
Distance.
We're at T junction, and there were a car parked opposite the end of the road, and it just went straight into the car and wrote it off. So,
oh dear. Well, I mean, I have a ridiculous number of stupid things I've done, and I daren't really talk about them, to be honest. I don't want to incriminate myself. But one thing I am willing to share is something that I did. Again, young man, stupid. You know, I was young. I needed the money. It wasn't that bad. I once flipped an FZR 600 practicing one-handed wheelies. And smashed my bike up. I wasn't too badly hurt, luckily, but yeah, that's one of the stupid things I did when I was a young man. What about you, Greg?
Great question, thank you.
Apart from buying a Harley, and I mean, obviously you dropped the bike on your foot once. That was an accident. That wasn't a deliberate thing that you've gone out and done. I don't suppose you've done anything too stupid. Try and keep up with Kenny.
Well, I think Kremlin's done 4 stupid things, really.
What, by 4
Harleys?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah, okay. We'll let you off the hook, Gremlin. All right, so next question we have from Ollie, and Ollie tells us he has an R1 track bike and a Hayabusa for the road. So I was going to make fun of him for being a Hayabusa rider and call him a straight liner, but if he's got a track bike as well, I guess he likes going around corners. So, but we've got a plethora of questions. Yes, a plethora of questions from Ollie. Write that down. Ollie's first question is there a bike you regret selling? And for him,
my 3 previous Harley Davidsons.
he's regrets selling.
That's only because you lost so much money on them.
Yeah, Ollie regrets selling his Melee, his RSV 1000 Melee. But what have I regretted selling? I mean, the GS was a bike I loved to ride, and you know, maybe I should have kept it. But it had 72,000 miles on the clock, and it was starting to break. Bits and bobs were going wrong with it, and BMWs are expensive bikes to repair. I mean, I remember the alternator seized one winter, and even a used alternator was thick end of nearly £200 to buy. And you know, and when things like that start going wrong and they start breaking down, you're best off getting rid, aren't you? But yeah, so I don't really have any bikes that I regret selling. What about
Gremlin does that every 6 months at service time.
Yeah. And part two of the same question, any you regret buying? That's an interesting question. Any you regret buying?
Oh, here we go. Yeah, all four of my Harleys, don't they? That's what you say, Big Ben.
I think the only bike I regret selling was actually an off-road bike. And it was a Mako 490.
Mako? Blimey.
Yeah. Proper, you know, 500cc, two-stroke monster.
So why do you regret selling it? Was it a great bike, was it?
No, it was an awful bike.
Was it?
But you know, I think I sold it for like £1,000 and they're now worth £5,000.
I get you.
It's like that.
From a financial
iconic
standpoint.
Yeah, that iconic era.
Any you regret buying? Any bikes you bought it would be wonderful and you were really disappointed with?
No, because usually to buy something, I'd usually test ridden it or borrowed a mate's or done something. So, no, nothing.
I've loved every bike I've owned. There's no doubt about it. But if I had to say I regret buying a bike, it was probably the ZX7. I bought it on eBay in an auction, paid about 1,400 quid for it. And when it arrived, I mean, I bought it just by looking at photos. I never actually saw the bike until it arrived. When it arrived, it was a real dog. It really needed a lot of work. And I probably, over the course of the next 18 months, spent £1,000 repainting it, buying a new wheel because one of the wheels was buckled, a new under tray because the under tray had been drilled and sawn in half, and a new pipe because the pipe had dents in it. And, you know, just spending £100 here, £250 there, £100 here, probably spent £1,000 quid. So it stood me at two and a half grand. And when I eventually decided to sell it, I put it on eBay on an auction, and you know what? I only got 980 quid for it. So I lost 1,000 quid plus on that bike. So if I'm going to say any bike I regretted buying, it was probably the ZX7. But I enjoyed riding it while I had it. You know, that's bikes for you, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't make money on bikes, I don't think, generally speaking. Oh, right. Okay. Next question from Ollie. Like I said, we have a plethora. The next one says the greatest thing or best moment that's happened due to biking, i.e. meeting someone or ending up somewhere special. So apart from you guys meeting me, is there anything that has been as special as that for you?
Regrets, you mean? Yeah.
I mean, there's too many.
No, I think probably one of the greatest things with the motorbikes is the people I've met over the years, be it off-road or on-road. Like I say, probably my best friend of sort of pushing 30 years now, came through meeting him on a motorbike, and then...
Oh, it's prison.
That was in that house, wasn't it?
Yeah, just sort of... I think it's just the people over the years, either through racing or, you know, through just socialising or, you know, through the next stage of that for me was the masonry side sort of.
Was it masonry that got you into, was it biking that got you into masonry then?
No, that was...
totally unrelated.
Yeah, I'd been interested in masonry for a lot of years, and it was people I knew scuba diving who were masons. And I kept asking, and then never did anything about it, and then asked again, did nothing about it for a lot of years, until eventually sort of went to a goose and gridiron night, and it sort of went from there. Met people who I'd known for 20 years who were in it, and thought, oh, I didn't know you were a mason.
Right.
And that got me into that. And then obviously from there, people saying, oh, well, there is a motorbike sort of section of the Masons. And then I think I met Gremlin at I went to one of his lodge night
yeah.
at Harlow, just as a visitor anyway. Met up with him, spoke to him, and I met Mad Manx was there as well. I think he'd just become a member the month before or something like that. So
right, yeah.
I met Mad Manx that night and
started riding with us.
Yeah, I think that was it. Sort of I joined up and went from there.
The greatest thing about me with motorcycling is buying my wife a motorbike and encouraging her to take her test.
Well
So
said.
it means we can
Well
ride
said.
out together. So, you know, for any ladies out there, take your test. It's fantastic. My wife absolutely loves the freedom of being on a motorbike.
And what bike does she ride out of interest?
It's a Harley Davidson.
There you go.
It's a Sportster. She's just gone. She's just gone from an 883 to a Sportster 1200T low, and it's really lovely. It's a lovely bike, and it's a lovely bike for her.
She looks the part as well, doesn't she?
Yeah, she does.
Donna. Yeah, she's good.
So, any ladies, take your test. It isn't a man's world, motorbike. Well, it is, but it's a fantastic world for men and women. And it'd be great to see more ladies out there.
Definitely, 100% agree. More the merrier.
Rather than these ugly buggers I have to look at every day.
I'm going to say, I think we should allow women in our fraternity because it would certainly improve the
scenery.
The view.
The scenery.
Yeah.
Careful, we'll get accused of being sexist if you carry on like that. Oh yeah. So I mean, as far as me, too many. I mean, I've been riding bikes now for 30 years, and there are too many memories and happy moments on bikes, riding with friends, riding with my brothers in the Widow Sons, crazy stuff, dangerous things that have happened, stories to tell. There's just too many. Bikes have been my life, definitely been part of my life, big part of my life for the last 30 years, and I hope to keep riding for another 30 years.
Same here.
Cool. There is one more question, but
you won't be alive in 30 years, you old bugger.
No. Thanks.
Well, I'll be in a bath chair, won't I? Being pushed around, or a trike.
We'll be in trikes. We'll be on trikes, won't we? There's there's one more question, but I suggest we maybe save it for the next episode.
Well, actually, I have one question that's come in, and it's from Gwyneth. She's 75, lives in Wales. She thinks that Pigpen sounds like a real dish. Well, Gwyneth, no.
Right, okay, guys. Let's wrap up the episode. Thank you all.
Oh yeah.
Please
time to call it a night.
Please send in your emails. We love hearing from you. It'd be great to get some questions. We live for feedback. Thoroughly enjoyed the episode this time, guys. Thank you for being on. So I'm going to say goodbye from Yaka and Gremlin.
It's good night from him.
And
it's good night from me.
Okay, cheers, guys, and we'll catch you all on the next episode. See you all later.
Bye.
Bye.
See y'all later.